and welcome to How to Go Independent, where we help employee financial advisors explore, research, learn about, and decide on what kind of independent business model they'd like to move their business to. Today I'm going to talk about the nitty-gritty of getting accounts moved to your new independent practice. And the question I'm going to answer is, how do I decide on if I should have a transition team, and if I should, what should I look for in selecting one? So a lot of advisors, especially when you go independent, people don't want to tend to spend money or invest the money in staff in particular, because that can be expensive. I understand that, especially if you have a relatively modest practice where paying for staff member will kind of eat into or have you go below the desired income you're looking for, even if you have a successful transition. So I guess the first point I'll make is, if you're going to do your own paperwork and you're not going to hire someone, just be prepared to put in a lot of work and a little bit extra compared to if you had help. Because learning a whole new system from scratch and moving a bunch of accounts and dealing with clients and, getting the registration stuff squared away and little things that pop up, that's a lot to consider and deal with at one time. So just be prepared to drink through a fire hose, so to speak. I know lots of advisors who have done that, typically earlier in their careers, or when they're only moving a fraction of what they work with at their current firm. In other words, a relatively moderate amount of accounts to move over and the clients to deal with. So it can be done. I do think these days there are so many options to have help that I would tend to stay away from it. But if you're dead set on doing it without any help, just be aware you're gonna have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be pretty intense. Now, let's assume that you would like to get some help and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to identify a good transition team, or what should you look for in a team or a person that's going to help you. So I think the first thing you want to look for is they have at least some experience in the system you're going to be using. Again, some of this might seem obvious, but if you haven't made a transition before, then it may not occur to you, so I'll lay it out anyways. So you want someone who's familiar with the system. They've opened a decent number of accounts, and particularly they've done transfers, ACATs. You might quiz them on, how long have they been affiliated with a particular platform, broker, dealer, custodian that you're working with. What's their background? How many transitions. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Just make sure they have familiarity with the system. And one way to test for that might be to have you ask them to show you the basics of the system, how to log in, the high level areas. Maybe ask them what are some of the weaknesses of the system that they use, that you would be using. That might give some insight on how much knowledge they have about the system itself. Because even if you have a phenomenal assistant that you're bringing with, they're not going to have much knowledge on the new system, obviously. Now, if they're familiar with the industry, a lot of that translates. But again, it's not the same as being familiar with the industry and the actual system. So step one, again, if you're going to use someone, is sort of obvious, but look for someone who's got some experience using the system itself. Whether or not they've done transitions, make sure they've got that experience. The next point I would look for is, do they have the capacity to help you directly? If usually good staff people are already spoken for, they're working for someone, so they're not just free agents looking to help people on a one-off basis. They've already got someone paying their salary on a month-to-month basis. And obviously the person who's paying them is probably going to want most of their time. So in an ideal scenario, you're looking for someone who has some excess capacity. Maybe they're only working part-time. They like to work like to work more. Maybe they are in between permanent roles, and they've decided they like being more of a floater, working on a project by project basis. There could be any number of reasons that someone would be out there, but you want this mix of experienced and talented, but also available. So, and that's a tricky mix because you're looking for more of a project-based relationship, at least in this scenario where you just need a transition team. And the people that are good at this are probably going to be already employed somehow. So it's kind of or you're looking for someone that's part of a larger organization that this is what they do. So again, that goes more to how do you select a platform. And if you're going to look for a network of support, you're going to have to look at the pricing. How much is that going to cost you? Because I guess one point I want to make is this transition is a very, very important, but it's a relatively limited amount of time. So maybe it's 3 to 4 months of hardcore focused work. But I think you want to be leery of getting into a situation where you're paying a large override, a large revenue share to some infrastructure provider or, quote unquote business partners. You don't want to pay a large percentage of your revenue indefinitely for something that only takes 3, 4, 6 months, if that makes sense. This is more of a one-time investment versus an ongoing, revenue share. And that's, I think, something you really, really want to think through, even though you do want to find someone good if you're looking to make the transition with some help. So it's kind of a fine line. We're looking for someone who's available, good, talented, knows the system, but isn't necessarily someone you have to commit to permanently. So you want them to have capacity. You can ask questions about how they juggle their work. You could ask, types of work they're providing or doing for other people right now. There's a number of ways you can kind of quiz the person or team about, how are they sure and how can they demonstrate or how can they explain to you they're going to be available, because it's an intense period there, especially that first 60 to 90 days, and maybe 30 to 60 days before the transition as well. If you're kind of thinking through how you're going to do things to get ready. The third thing, in an ideal scenario, you'd find someone who's done a couple transitions before. So in other words, if it's ideal if this is not the first time they've helped someone move. I will say that's not the end of the world if it is. For example, my assistant that helped me, it was the first time. We were the first 2 people she'd helped move when one of my colleagues and I came from Morgan Stanley to Independent. She was experienced and had knowledge, and I'm kind of thinking of her as I'm laying out what I'd look for, because I would look for exactly her right now, especially because she's an expert. But she was very good at it, and we learned a couple lessons. So I'd say pick for talent and a little bit of experience with the system, and attitude is first before this specific experience. But it is great if they've done it before and have some lessons learned. With Teresa, who I'm talking about, she can even gauge now, when there'll be these emotional lows that we go through as an advisor, when we've submitted all these ACATs and we feel like we've done a ton of work and you don't see a lot of results on the other end. At some period, whether that's a week in or 7 weeks in, there's usually this we hit a wall, as she'll call it. So in fact, I probably should interview her on the podcast at some point. She's got a phenomenal bank of experience now doing this. So, but in an ideal world, you want someone who's done it before, or if not, who's moved a lot of accounts, so they know how the ACAT process, they know what's not eligible for ACAT, they know their back office of the custodian or the broker dealer, so they can troubleshoot if they need to. They're organized, obviously, like any assistant. All the attributes you'd want of a good assistant, plus experience in moving accounts, and ideally in a bunch of them at once. The next thing would be that you want someone who really understands the psychology of going through a transition as an advisor. Like I said, Teresa's familiar with that, hitting a wall issue, and she's very aware of it, and I think she's done a great job, both with me and Linda Mills, who moved with me, in 2009 and dozens of advisors since, she's aware that this is a stressful period for us, and she kind of puts her ego in the back seat and tries not to let it, get in the way, because we all have different ways of doing things. But so you want someone who's cognizant of the emotional stress and financial risk we may be taking. Even if it goes well, it can be stressful. So you want someone who seems to understand the process from the advisor's perspective. Then you also want someone, the next point would be someone who kind of has a process, has an idea of how they want this to work. Again, that could be because they've done it a bunch, or it could be because they've just worked with the system a little bit and they understand, where the hiccups and where the hangups can be. So they at least have a framework for a recommended way to get things done, because that goes to having done it before or being familiar with the system. If they don't know anything, if they just say, well, we'll just do whatever you want, or we'll just give it a shot, that's a little bit of a red or at least a yellow flag on maybe this isn't the right person or team to put your faith and confidence in to help you move your clients over. And then on the flip side of that, there's also needs to be a little bit of give and take, where the assistant or the team realizes that you may have specific preferences on how you want to communicate with your clients. All kind of nuance on the sequence of forms, whether digital or paper, how they're going to get there, who's going to communicate with the client. Those things are very important. So you want your team to be willing and able to work with you a little bit. Now they need to have some process, because if they're just leaving it to you, then you don't need them, to decide what's the best practice. But if you decide you want to do something that's not best practice and you're willing to do the work to make that happen because you think it's the best way for you to communicate to your clients, you need ideally to have someone who will work with you a little bit, because they understand this is your business. You understand, you have a comfort level and your clients have a comfort level, and you're going to be the best one to make those calls, make the decisions on how to communicate, when to communicate, what to communicate. But there are certain best practices that a good team is going to not let you violate. Either that's from a compliance standpoint or wasting time and energy on certain operational issues. You want to have someone who has a little bit of a backbone. So I guess they need to be, have some structure, but also be somewhat flexible to your particular personality and set of circumstances. The next thing that I think you really want to look for is someone who will train you on the system. Again, I'm assuming this is a transition team and that's their main focus. As I mentioned, in Teresa's case, that's her role. She loves the kind of the adrenaline and the project-based nature. Her compensation is also, she's bonus based on assets she brings over. So that is a big part of her interest, is she's getting, these are like bonus opportunities every time she gets to work with a new advisor. So you want someone who, if they're helping you move for, say, 30 to 60 days prior to 60 to 90 days after your move, you want someone who's going to spend that time also, getting everything done, but as they're doing it, getting you educated on the system, or your staff if you have your own team, your own assistant, because that can leverage her time spent with you, not just to get up and running, because if you just get accounts over, you're going to be up but not running. You're going to be up and walking or up and standing. If you can learn the basics, especially of the system, she can give you some hints on, he or she hints on key things that you need to know or that are, commonly missed. There's nothing that beats that, one-on-one type service and training, especially when you're dealing with your existing real life accounts. Real life situations are coming up. And so you want someone who's not just going to tell you to get out of the way and do all the work, but not teach you how to do anything. Because that may be great to get all your stuff over, but if you're kind of helpless, well, now you're going to have to figure out a way. It's just not good. You don't want to have clients. You don't want the risk of having things fall through the cracks because you didn't understand the system, and that could, getting everyone over, but then not knowing how to work the system, having poor service, or having issues, that's not an ideal transition. So I think you really want someone who will pledge to train you, who's demonstrated the personality, that they're not just trying to show how smart they are and keep all the information to themselves. I think we've all come across people or assistants that they want their advisor to be helpless, so that it's kind of job security. I think you want to look for someone who's got the confidence to train you and share their knowledge, and is proud to have you go out into the world as a fully up and running and operational practice. One last thing I think you want is, if you can find someone that's got this incentive compensation that I just referenced set up to be a little extra oomph to help you want to move and work the hours required and be flexible. Again, we set up that compensation for Teresa because we want to recognize her hard work, and she's got that personality anyways, but it certainly is, people seem to appreciate when you set things up to reward their dedication and success. So, we don't care if stuff gets moved between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m., or if we got to work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. sometimes. We bonus her on the assets moved for the advisor. So that kind of aligns everyone's interests, because we don't want anyone spending a lot of time and not moving assets, and we don't care how little time is spent if clients say yes and assets come over. So we try to work with advisors who are going to appreciate her time, who are relatively organized, so that we're not having her going wild goose chases, because she's not going to get paid the bonus money on someone who does a lot of work, but makes her do a lot of work, but doesn't bring assets. So we've tried to be more selective to avoid that, and we've gotten better over time. But so in an ideal world, you want someone with some sort of alignment in your interest. And again, if they have the right personality and attitude, this isn't critical, but again, I threw it in there because we've got that set up and it seems to work exceedingly well, because we're always happy to write those bonus checks. It's a great celebration, both for us as the network that provides the infrastructure, for Teresa, and for the advisor. In our case, we pay it directly. We don't have the advisor pay it. We just build that into our pricing, and doesn't take much because it's a one-time investment in helping people move. So of course, we're very proud of our model and how we've set it up, but this wasn't meant to be a commercial for Teresa necessarily, but she's kind of the picture of what I have in mind of what you'd want to look for. She's just got the mindset for it, the talent, the attitude, the compensation model, the availability, and the incentive compensation, which I might have already said, but she's done it a bunch of times. So, there may not be people like that, like her everywhere, but I think she wasn't like this when I met her either. I kind of saw the need for her services, and I've basically used that as a big selling point, and it has been extremely successful from my perspective. So I'd say if you're looking to build your own network at some point, find someone that you can create capacity, and then who's available, who's willing and able to work in these sprints when someone comes over. And we're in the process of someone moved about 3 months ago, has moved $75 million in assets or so with no assistant coming with. And she's been instrumental. She's been a rock star, as one of my partners would say. And so it's been a success all around. We're high-fiving each other because everyone's happy. The clients are getting good attention. The advisors had great support. He's worked his tail off, but he's had Teresa to help train and coach and punch in all the data. Then we as the network are thrilled to have that system working, and she's going to do well on that transition. So again, you can create your own if you have the kind of the attitude and the beginnings of some experience with that system. I don't think you want to have someone dive into transitions until they're at least a little bit familiar with the system, the platform you're talking about. I think that's all I've got on this topic. I hope that's useful, especially if you're trying to figure out where to land in making a transition. Again, it's probably a separate issue to discuss. Well, how do you decide, how much support you should get versus, what you just pay for one time, versus paying an override. again, in this situation, we're typically talking about someone's going to pay 3 to 10% of revenue. For the larger producer, on the low end, if it's someone who's, earlier in their practice, they're going to be closer to the 10%. But again, nothing close to what you would pay in a full service, plug and play model. What we tend to do is, help you plug and play. And then you're only getting charged for the one-time plug-in, you're not paying an ongoing charge for being plugged in. So I think that's a great model for most advisors if they can get past the fear of, a lot of work in the upfront.